This video is going to go over the setup for low latency using jack audio with CWirc. We've got everything hooked up, so I'll just demonstrate it for a bit, and then we'll go over some of the details and how to set this up. So my paddles are hooked to the serial port pins, a direct paddle connection from the DIT, the DA, and the ground over to the CTS, the DSR, and the DTR pins. There'll be a link in the show notes on how I set this up, and it should be the same for you since CWirc has this configuration here. I'm using a USB to serial port adapter, so this is the string that I use for that. The sound device string stays the same because we're using the aoss XChat command instead of the padsp to bring up XChat. You have to choose one or the other, otherwise XChat usually doesn't have with the pulse audio that's normally on your Ubuntu or other Linux distro, you usually have to do this to hear anything, or you'll get an error, the dev.dsp error. So using the aoss, it is quite a bit faster than padsp, and that's what we're looking for, is lower latency. So to get this to work, you'll need to see if you have alsa-oss installed. So look in your Synaptic Package Manager or whatever you're using and see if you have that already installed. If not, install it, then this should work. So this brings up XChat. And then I just load into a server, and as soon as it loads up, I disconnect from the server. If you have the user list buttons checked on that view menu there, just go ahead and click it, and that brings up CWirc. And you can start using it. So we have that working. Here's my keyer settings that I'm using. And in jack audio, I'm using the pulse audio output for it. So even though I'm saying aoss XChat, it's because of Cadence, which is one of the secret weapons for getting this set up. It allows you to have a pulse audio to jack bridge, and I found that to be the fastest and the lowest latency. So it's coming out of this sync, going into a filter to filter the sharp rise and fall. I think it's about 2 milliseconds rise, 2 milliseconds fall time that CWirc has when it sends CW. That's just a little bit of hard keying, so I'm using this cat filter to trim that down a little bit, so it's more like it's 5 or 6 milliseconds. And it has a pretty good spectrum, as you can see over here. So I'll try to find the CAF filter here, and we'll disconnect it. Put it back in. And you should be able to hear and see the difference here. Brings it into a little bit narrower spectrum, just like a bandpass filter, and that's what we're using here, this CAF filter. We're bringing all the filters up. These are all LV2 filters using the jalv.select from jalv.select, which is something you can download in your package manager. Right there I have it. And this lists all the LV2 plugins, and because I'm using KXstudio and his repos, I'm using his meta audio plugins, and that includes these LV2s. And then whatever else I saw in the package manager that had LV2, I kind of got those too, and just a whole bunch of them. And I'll go over the ones that I've used for this setup here. This spectrum thing that you see is Spectrum 3D. Simple Scope is an LV2. We're using a jack mixer. That's a native jack app you can get in the package manager. Fldigi is using pulse audio because it's faster. So again, it's coming out of that bridge. So when I type on when I type on Fldigi, it's a lot less delay than if you use jack or alsa. And I have have Fldigi and CWirc sending out about the same amount of volume. For the Mumble input, you want it to be around minus 14 dB or so. And here's Fldigi. Let's bring that over so we can see it. And back to the paddles. We also have an LV2 plugin, which is a peak meter. So that's close to 14 there. Let's clear that out. So up there you see 14 minus 14. Let's try Fldigi. So very well matched up. So that's a useful LV2 plugin. Okay, for the input and output of Mumble, we're using loopback 4. I'm using the 4.1 here. I'm using alsa-in and alsa-out commands 4.0 to match that cable. There's the Mumble input. There's the Mumble output. And I'm using 5 periods. You might be able to shorten that down. The default is 2, so you wouldn't have to have a dash n. The dash C is 1 channel. Dash J is just what you call it, and whatever you put after that. So we have alsa out, dash D, hardware 4.0. Alsa in, dash D, hardware 4.0. And that brings it into jack audio. Here's the connection bay for the KXstudio Catia. So here's the Mumble output, and here's the Mumble input. So they show up in jack audio, and you just left click, hold, and start drawing wires. So this looks like a jumbled deal here. It takes a little work. There's ways to save this too once you go to the effort to set it up. You can use one of the other KXstudio apps to set it up and then save it in there, or there's some other programs that you can use to save all your setup, so you bring it up again, it'll wire everything up for you, which saves a little bit of time. So what I did first was start Cadence, which is a secret weapon of this setup, this KXstudio app for jack audio. So we just started, then I immediately brought in desktop audio using an alsa command, which you may have seen right here. So alsa in, and the desktop audio, because of KXstudio scripts that we're using here with the KXstudio setup, he's using hardware 1.0. So I need 1.1 to hear it. So I turned the quality down just a little bit to take some of the CPU pressure off. It comes, I think the default is 1. It goes up to 4. Using 5 periods. I might go to 6 next time. If this delay pops in there, you can increase the periods. Calling it desktop audio. So that, because it's set first, and you bring up the browser and start your audio, then it'll stay that way once you bring up Pulse Audio. It won't switch to Pulse Audio. But if you bring up a browser after you've turned on Pulse Audio, the audio will default to Pulse Audio instead of going through this loopback cable here, through the alsa in. I'm using a compressor and an EQ. And I just have some browser audio playing from the Magnatune website here. Just clicking on something for some audio. And that just makes it convenient, so that, because if everything was coming through Pulse Audio through your filter, you wouldn't be able to hear it very well, since this is a CW filter and not a voice filter or music filter. The compressor I like because the volume on online stuff, on the internet websites, can be so variable. And when you're listening or you're doing something else, you want the volume to stay consistent. So if they talk too low or talk too high, it doesn't blow out your speakers. You set it, you can forget it. It'll keep it right at a, plus or minus just a little bit. You can keep that volume really steady. Let's see if I can find that compressor. That's what we're using for the compressor, and that's an LV2 plugin. So we just set that up, And then we EQ'd it just a little bit for little bit of extra bass, and you just kind of listen to it and adjust that. That's another LV2 plugin. This is the plugin for the filter. So I'm going to turn the tone up just a little bit, and then we're going to take this in and out. That's with the filter in. Here's with the filter out. So let's look at the spectrum too. So it's a little bit wide, and here's what it looks like. Now if you wanted to, you can turn the resonance up to get softer edges, and you'll watch the waveform change a little bit here on the scope. That's a little bit too soft for me. So right around there, you just dial that in however you like. The frequency is just the center of the bandpass, and I just left it set at default for inertia. Again, I can vary this on jack mixer. I've got it set up in here, so this mixer only affects what I hear and of course what the video is hearing, because we're running the same wires. So if I wanted to turn this tone down, it won't affect what goes to Mumble input. And this scope is set for the Mumble input and Mumble output. Let me turn it down a little bit. Now in the USB mic, I'm using another alsa command. Right there. So I have a USB mic. It's a lot better than the laptop mic for sure. So that brings it into here, and I'm using an EQ just to adjust my voice a little bit. There was a little bit of hiss on this right here, so I took that down. Try to get rid of some of that. A little bit of extra bass, so that affects my microphone here. It's going straight to the sound card so I can hear it, and I don't notice any delay. So the latency is really good on this setup. And I'm running this at 48K, 160 buffers. Block latency is that. Here's my configure. Just using the Realtek. I have a Realtek HD sound card. I'm also running in performance and the CPU scaling. I have a low latency kernel that was in Synaptic Package Manager, so I just downloaded that. I'm in the audio group, and that's all low latency stuff too. And you can look that up online to get a little bit more idea how to make your Linux computer more productive and more functional in a low latency mode. So I did as many things as I could, and I'm running pretty good at 160. This is about the lowest I can go without too many X runs. And these X runs are mostly from loading and unloading some programs that were kind of buggy. Otherwise, it runs pretty stable. Even with this video running, we don't see an ever-increasing X run, which is really good. So we have a limiter here, and what that does, let's see if I can find it. That keeps the Mumble output. There it is. That keeps the Mumble output. It has a tendency on some packet losses to produce a full volume Opus related audio spike. And so now I've limited that to -10. That's just a little bit above what normally is coming out of Mumble. So when that Opus spike hits, it doesn't hurt your ears at all. This is a very fast limiter. So I thought that was useful. And again, it's an LV2 plugin that's already loaded. I just brought it up, found it, and brought it up. This is a true peak monitor. And that helps me set the output for both Fldigi and the pedals. So I'm going to redo this. And as you see, it was around right about there. And I set that the same for Fldigi, so they both put out about the same. And that keeps the Mumble AGC circuit. So if you ping that AGC, if your volume's too heavy and that AGC kicks in, it can distort your signal just a little bit. So we try to stay just under that AGC circuit that Mumble has. And we found that it's pretty close to minus 14 dBs, the threshold of when that Mumble's own AGC for the input audio for it to kick in. So this is another LV2 plugin. Very useful. And I'll write these down what I'm using here. If you're interested, you can look them up. Screen recorder. This is the meters on the right. The one on the left is wired for the output. And I have mobile output here and the output from my paddles and Fldigi. Since both paddles and Fldigi are coming out this pulse audio jack sync. Right into here. And then if we go to Mumble, go to a room, the meter on the right kicks in. So we can also do this. It's always a good idea to check the loopback latency, your loopback test, to see how you sound and how fast you run it. So let's do a dit. So you can see the left meter, then the right meter on the top right. The first is the tone from my computer. The second is it arriving back to my computer after going to California and back from Missouri. So that's all pretty good. It's good enough. So that checks out good. Now if you wanted to adjust the volume of Mumble, you're able to do so with this jack mixer. So you can dial that in just how you like it. Same thing with the tone. Dial that in just how much you want to hear. So this jack mixer really comes in handy. Okay. And the desktop is just for audio. If you wanted to listen to that in the background. But it's also useful when you're not in QSO. You want your regular audio to stay available so you don't have to shut down everything. Here's the latency test with jack audio. Strike, the paddle strike is on the left, and then when the tone begins is right here. And it takes about 32 milliseconds, 16 milliseconds faster than when you use pulsed audio, the pulse audio latency video, low latency video. So this is significantly faster. Either way, it really isn't that bad, but this is pretty close to near zero latency. Anything between 20 and 30 milliseconds is considered in the music industry, as far as playing, that it's you really don't notice any difference in how you play the instruments, whether they're musical instruments or Morse code instruments. So this is excellent latency performance when using CWirc and Fldigi. Now I set the volume down here so that it would match what CWirc is putting out, and also matches the input of Mumble here. We want that to maintain about the same. That's doing a pretty good job of that. And I think that's basically it. It's really nice. The performance of CWirc as a keyer is really excellent. Its timing is just near perfect. We measured dits, a stream of dits like this, and I measured them one by one, and they were all exactly the same length, and the space between them exactly the same length when using the serial port to key. And I thought that was exceptional. I haven't experienced that when trying to use a Windows app. There's a few Windows applications that you can use using Wine, and all of those had a little glitch in the timing. So it's nice to find a native Linux application that works this way without any timing glitches. So I'm very impressed with the way CWirc performs as an IAMBIC paddle, especially in this low latency. So I'm just going to go over everything just one last time, make sure we got it all. We showed you Cadence. That's the EQ we're using for my voice. Those are the that's the USB mic, how I brought it in. That's jack mixer. And let me go over that just for a second. Over here on the left, I have the inputs. I have mono input for tone and mumble, and stereo input for desktop, left and right. And I'm just using the outs for those, for the tone. One out, and then the stereo out. Now on the one outs, we go ahead and draw two lines so that I can hear it in both left and right channels on system. System is a sound card. There's Mumble, that's the peak meter, Fldigi. Let me show you the Fldigi settings here for audio. Again, we're just checking pulse audio. You can use jack, it does have jack audio, but it takes a little bit longer from hitting the keyboard until you hear it. Plus it was nice to have both the paddles and Fldigi coming out of the same unit here, this jack sync. So we can use the filter on the same and keep the volumes the same. And it's easy to adjust Fldigi otherwise. It was just something I wanted to try. Timing a QSK. Fldigi has an excellent bandpass filter, and it's very impressive. You can adjust the width right here. Settings. I have it modem signal on left and right channels. And the main settings for this is right here on the timing. So you see I have the edge timing to match what's coming out of CWirc, so the spectrum and the sound of it is about the same. It has two different Blackman and Hanning as far as raise cosine. You can adjust the weight, dash dot ratio. This is the rise and fall time, and whether or not you want to do this bandpass filter. So that's all good. It's mumble input, mumble output. That's the meters. That's the scope. This is a great, I really love this plugin. It's really nice to look at the waveform. And if you wanted to, you can move this up. You can change the smaller, bigger. And that's, I'm going to have it on continuous mode. That's the other mode it uses with no trigger. But sometimes it's nice to, for this particular mode, it kind of freezes it until it comes back again. It gives you an idea so you can look at it and analyze it a little bit easier. So the mixer fits right in here really nice. It's nice having that available. Okay, so much for that. That's the limiter. I already showed you that setup so that what's coming out of Mumble doesn't go to full volume and hurt your ears. If you have it set for -12 and it comes out at 0, that's quite a bit louder. This is a really nice application for looking at the spectrum. The CAF filter. That's the equalizer for the desktop audio, compressor for the desktop audio. That's the list of X plugins. I think that's about it. So for low latency on CWirc, the best we have is using jack audio, and especially using the Cadence plugin, this pulse audio to jack bridge. Thank you for watching.